Our first item on the agenda tonight is comments from the public on items not on the agenda, and I know we have some members of the community here tonight. So this is typically a 5-minute portion of our meeting, but I'm willing to give it a little bit more time, extend it to 15 minutes if that would be helpful. And I know there are a couple of issues that folks would like to bring to the board's attention. So are there any comments from the public at this point? Tom?
Thank you all, and my sincere thanks to you, Brendan, and to Superintendent Mark for just a few minutes. I'm here with several of my team members from the Essex High School Band Boosters, and the issue we wanted to bring up, and we come in collaborative spirit, out of respect, to find out about the protocol, but largely to ask, to seek a dialogue to start with you at the appropriate time and place when we are officially on the agenda, to talk about the shared concerns we have with the music program at Essex Middle School and the decision therein. Now you might ask, why is the Essex Band Boosters involved? Why are they here? Why has this grassroots effort with email gone out? And just real quickly, I'll, in the spirit of time, our mission is about building awareness of and advocacy for the music program, not just at Essex High School, but all of our constituency schools that feed into eventually our program, whether it's EMS, ADL, or Founders. We try to define the value of a music experience at all the schools, and we believe those provide an important set of life skills, whether it's commitment, discipline, service to others, self-sacrifice, and being an important part of the community. It's also advocacy for the music programs in addition to our constituency schools, community outreach for furthering the music experience, whether it's local residents of a retirement community coming to our dinner, dance, and fundraising event at Essex High School, or the Essex High School general student population getting behind the pep band. We're out there at different sporting events. We've made a conscious effort to do some of those community outreach efforts. And particularly with the last two bullets on the slide I passed around the first page, I think because of that, we had parents come up to us, approach us towards the end of last school year and this summer with concerns about the decision. And I'm not being facetious, making no judgments there. It's my understanding some dialogues have attempted to be started. But our role is more to be advocates, and we're concerned from their perspective and about the future of music at our high school, but at the constituent schools. And our concerns are this, and then again, we're here to ask how we go about engaging in dialogue at the appropriate time and place down the road, because I know it's not tonight and we're not on the agenda. We're concerned about, we're unsure why performing arts was moved outside the school day. From our perspectives collectively, we feel this reclassifies the music program from a core curriculum component to an after-school activity. We also believe this will adversely affect the music participation rates, and that it may in fact force a fair number of students to have to make an extremely difficult choice between music, sports, and other meaningful activities. And that begs the question, does that provide for equal access to or opportunity for music programs compared to other activities, and is it really leveling the playing field? And again, in terms of what we're here to ask for tonight, is just simply to find out how can we go about engaging a dialogue. We're under no illusion that all the conversations and potential solutions or answers or resolutions would happen in one night. We understand that, and we want to respect the protocol. But I think it's important to have that dialogue, because I believe, or we believe firmly, that down the road we may have second thoughts about that decision. I was talking to Superintendent Andrews before tonight. There was an email that went around where he was expressing his gratitude and appreciation for the event that took place at the high school on the 14th, I think it was, the K-12 Fine Arts Night. And I was there that night and spoke on a couple of occasions about the boosters and what we're trying to do to the orchestra group, to the chorus group, and to bands. And when I read his email, I thought he articulated in fantastic fashion, said better than I could, why we think the music program is important, and in turn, why this issue at EMS is important. And he said, I read as follows: years of research show that the arts are closely linked to almost everything that we as a nation say we want from our children and demand from our students. And those are academic achievement, social emotional development, civic engagement, and equitable opportunity. Let's keep the arts alive in our schools and communities. So I mean, I couldn't have said that better myself. And in that context, I think one can reasonably see why we have a concern with the decision at Essex Middle School. And I know there are numbers. You know, we've done our homework. It's taken us a while to get to this point to approach you, to make this initial approach. When you look at numbers, for example, bear with me one second, at the EMS band level, for example, on the 7th and 8th grade band and the 6th grade band respectively,
we have 40 current students and 38 current students. And I know if you look historically, the last couple of years, those are decent numbers and a level. And that, so one may reasonably say, well, what's a concern or why does that give you pause? If you look at it from the perspective of students playing from last year, both 7th and 8th grade bands and 6th grade bands, if you focus on 7th and 8th, in the perspective of students playing from last year, 35 out of 47 students who should be playing are playing. So 35 out of 47, which is 74% realization rate. And I'm an accountant by trade, so these are the kind of things I look at. On the 6th grade band, again, in the perspective of students playing from the previous year, 31 out of 64 who should be playing are. And that's a 48% realization rate. So I think that's our overall collective concern, is where is this direction going, the momentum, and to engage in dialogue at some point down the road, being able to say, and I know the school year's not even over yet, and this is the first year of this, but to ask the questions and do the analysis in the terms of, has this worked, is it working? I know it's first and foremost about EMS, but Essex High School has a stake as well. And so to wrap up, we're just looking to see how can we start this dialogue, engage in conversations to revisit decision, and by way of coming back at a future date as a formal agenda item, and also allowing other people who are passionate about this, other students, other parents, share their anecdotal stories about what the music program means to them, the impact it's had on their lives, consistent with what Mark said in his email, which I thought was very well written, and I couldn't have said it better myself, and we have my utmost respect for that. So
Great.
thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all of you who came to express a concern about this issue. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that it's a difficult time of evening, so I appreciate you coming out and sharing your concerns and showing your support for music education. This board is very supportive of music arts and music education in our district, and we're not prepared to fully engage in a dialogue tonight, but I can tell you that as a result of the emails and the inquiries that we received, we did ask for sort of a progress report on how things are going. And to your point, the year isn't yet complete, but we have some data that shows that it's not necessarily a doom and gloom situation. So when the decision was made almost a year ago, we had questions. I think we had concerns, and we heard from parents and teachers at the time. But we decided to go forward. The administration went forward with the change primarily, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, to alleviate the instances where students were plucked from a classroom during the day to participate in a band practice, thereby sort of interrupting the flow of their academic schedule in the course of a routine day. And so that's primarily the reason, at EMS especially, why that schedule change was made. The good news, at least for the data that we have so far, is that participation remains strong in music arts and band in particular. There has been a few students that come and go as far as we've looked at the numbers. When Kevin Briggs talked with those students, the reasons were not primarily because of the change in schedule or because of demands or having to choose between sports or music, so that was encouraging. And we actually, because of the introduction of chorus, we actually have more participation in music, and also in the submarine band. We have more participation in music than last year. So that's encouraging to us. So at this point, we're not seeing data that points to a detrimental effect on the programs today or in the future. But we're obviously going to keep our eye on the numbers, because that's what, this is just the first year, and we want to make sure that it's tracking the way we want it. If we saw a precipitous decline in participation, this board would be all over it, and we would be asking lots of questions of Mark and his team to take another look at the change that was instituted last year. So we don't have the full story tonight to engage in the dialogue, but a first look at the numbers, and I don't have the detail, the accountant's detail that you applied to the numbers, but would like to take a look at that. Did not give us a reason to sort of say, whoa, we need to sort of have an emergency meeting about this topic. But it is, I think, something that I know the administration would likely be open to. We're always open to dialogue. Whether or not the board is the right level for that dialogue to take place, I'm not sure. But it's something I'd like to talk with Mark more about what's the right next step for this conversation.
Then perhaps the board is not the right forum for the dialogue. All we're asking for is an opportunity to have that dialogue.
Yeah.
And continue conversation with somebody, just to have that opportunity.
Sure. Yeah, Doris?
Just to give you a little more history, I was part of the parent group who actually went directly to Mr. Briggs to ask him to reconsider his decision for a couple of reasons. Number one, when a music program is part of your academic day, all kids get to participate. When it becomes part of an after-school program, it's only those that can stay after school. And, you know, there is a bus at 2:15, 2:30. So there are families who need their kids to go home on that first bus, whether it's to babysit younger siblings or whatever.
Right.
So in my opinion, it's an access issue for some children. I also would want you to relook at the data, because when I hear that there were 60 fifth graders while in fifth grade in band, and only 30 of those kids chose to participate, and of course, some of them chose to do that because they decided they don't like the instrument or whatever. I think that's a statistic that would concern me as a board member, that is quite a dropout rate. I also know that orchestra, Tom didn't have the numbers for orchestra, but I know there were a significant number of kids that lost out on orchestra, or that chose not to do orchestra because of the schedule change. So I would urge you, in addition to talking to your principal, to provide a forum for parents to talk to, perhaps give a little bit of a different story on some of that information. The other thing, my daughter is in the chorus and absolutely loving it, and I'm pleased that they finally provided that program at the middle school. She's also in the VYCC, which is the chorus that's part of VYO. VYO requires their students to participate in their school programs because they really consider that a valuable partnership between schools and their organization. They now, because the Essex Middle School program is after school, they don't consider it a music program. They consider it an extra, and therefore, students at Essex Middle School do not need to participate in the orchestra in the building because VYO says, well, you're doing our program, and that's not a music program if it's after school. So I guess I urge you to, I think we are losing kids, and I think there is a statement to the community that it's at the same time as after-school programs rather than an academic program. And Kevin did say in the meeting that they were looking, that while kids had that time to go to band or orchestra and now chorus, that if you didn't do that, you were in your homeroom for enrichment, and that was time in the day where there wasn't a lot being accomplished. Well, I would say that that's not the music program's problem. It's the issue of administering that time in the room with the kids that choose not to do music, to make that a more valuable enrichment period for those children. So I guess I don't want to leave it. I want this to be continued to be discussed. And we urged Mr. Briggs to look at what the numbers were early in the year and to reconsider his decision. We also urged Mr. Briggs, which he freely admitted that he did not ask students their opinion before making this change. We urged him to revisit the issue with students to see how the decision at the administrative level made them feel about the music in their school. So I just would urge you to keep it and to put it on a future agenda. I think this is something the community, obviously you've had quite a few people come out this evening. There are people that are interested. You're always wanting, Brendan, people at your meetings, and here's a way to get them. So go for it.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Yes.
Hi, Margaret Smith, and in interest of time, I wrote a letter. So I would like you to peruse it at your leisure, but also take a look at the picture on the back, which is Albert Einstein, who played the violin in his spare time. I have a couple of extra letters. And a picture from the Essex Reporter of Lee Murphy, who started trumpet in 5th grade here at Founders. I know because I was his trumpet teacher in 5th grade. And he's now the principal trumpet in the Vermont Youth Orchestra's top orchestra. And we expect him to at least continue to do something in music in addition to his physics thoughts. So I want to thank all the band booster people for coming out And if you have questions about the letter, I'd be happy to
Great.
answer them, so.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this.
If I
Yeah,
could
Tom.
just close by saying, I think it's a matter of finding the right form and proper protocol, but I don't, as Darcy said, I don't foresee this issue going away and us going away, and there's obviously a number of parents who are concerned about this, so I think it's a matter of finding the proper
Right.
protocol and the dialogue and the
Yeah.
forum in which to engage.
Well, you know, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the manner in which you've addressed this issue and brought this issue forward. And I think from the board's perspective, we just need to figure out what's next, what the right next steps are. So I will certainly be in touch with you and others who've communicated about what those next steps might be. But obviously in this moment, I don't know what they are yet. But we'll definitely be in touch and appreciate very much you bringing your concerns to this table. So thank you.
You know, I would make the comment that you talk about there are lots of parents who have concerns, and we are definitely those parents also. I got to hear your spiel 3 times on Thursday because my son was in the band, my daughter was in the chorus, and so I sat through the orchestra too because it was quite good. It was really fantastic. And yeah, we did have a lot of concerns with this move, and we really have been keeping an eye on it. You know, I've tried to talk to some of the teachers in the middle school, as well as some of the kids. So know that we're all on the same team here. We value that program
Yes.
a huge amount.
And we try to underscore that in
Yeah.
the correspondence.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Great. Any other comments from the public? Yeah.
I'm not a taxpayer, so if there's a tax, I'm a teacher at Founders, but I'll just try to make mine quick. Basically, I do read your school board minutes, and I looked at the PowerPoint that was done last week on the kneecap scores, and I spoke in the mark about the kneecap scores, and also Ellen, I think, and Jessica about them. But what kind of I had questions about really was the plan, possible plan that includes implementing a test-taking unit at the beginning of 3rd grade to prepare for the kneecaps. And I'm just wondering what the purpose of that is, given that we already have a lot of other assessments to give that give us quite a bit of data, and the fact that this kneecaps have 1 more year, first of all, and that they're given in October. We don't even get the results till January or February, so we can't really use that information immediately to make programs for our kids. And I just went through and, you know, I do know how to use VCAT, Ellen, I'm pretty sure, and I use a lot of the stuff in here, but I may be off by a little percentage point. But if you look, I took the 3rd grade teams, and they helped me do this, a lot of them couldn't come tonight. But if you look at the different students, if you look across the board, kneecap, you know, 65% of Team CF were proficient on the kneecaps, 35% not proficient. If you go across there, our actual district data shows our scores even lower than that. So given that, I'm not sure why we would be prepping for kneecaps when we could better use that time to improve the instruction of kids. And I just know this year, it seemed like forever before we got the start of the school year going, with everything else that happens at the beginning of the school year. And if you look at all of the data there, I just want to make sure you understand that the GATES is closely resembles the kneecap in that it's a group administered test. There are some multiple choices on it. And kids who don't pass that are then given some other measures. And it's up to about 50% of the 3rd graders who don't pass the GATES who need to be given the DRA. So I just wanted to make that point. And the other point that was on this PowerPoint was that you were going to conduct an audit of current math reading instruction through surveys and walkthroughs. I do know that a couple of years ago, I'm one of the flood victims, so that it was either 2 or 3 years ago. I know I missed a lot of school last year, so I kind of lost track of time. But I think Rich Reed did his report at the end of 2011. I missed the fall of 2011. I think just a little bit was done in the district. I might not know this for sure, Mark, because I wasn't here. But I just wondered what happened to that report, because in that report, I did read online when I was home, the stuff about his recommendations, but he looked at an incredible amount of data and came up with a lot of suggestions about how to deal with reading across the district. And it was very expensive, so I guess I'm just wondering why we haven't looked at that and looked at some of those suggestions. And the other thing that I added is that some of you as parents would have known this, that, you know, at Founders, we made up a phonics assessment to do the 5th part of reading, which is one of the things that Rich Reed talked about, is there's actually 5 parts of reading, and our assessment model didn't really deal with the phonics piece, so we tried to do that, and we do give that as another assessment we give on top of everything else to all the 3rd graders at the start of the year and put them in intervention groups right away. And some of those intervention groups are in the classroom, some of them are taught by teachers, they're not all by special ed teachers. So again, it's only a few minutes, but if you'd like to know more about this, I'd like to tell you, but I just really hope that we're not going to cram for the kneecaps, because even Michael Hall, who's the head of the state testing, and he's making up the SBAC for the Common Core testing, would tell you that it doesn't work. So.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective with us. I don't have the level of detail, I think, to respond to some of your concerns, but we have, the board did receive an overview of Rich Reed's report, and I know that it has informed some of the plans and the thinking moving forward. We did get that kneecap presentation a few weeks ago, which was great. And I'm sure there are many different strategies being thought about or considered as we move forward. And so I don't know if the idea of cramming for the kneecaps is set in stone or not.
Can I just respond to that?
Yeah, certainly.
Because it's not an assessment, it's about the idea of teaching kids how to take a test, how to look back in a test, how to open a test, how to sit for a test.
Right.
So it's the idea of actually doing, many places publish different units on the kinds of conversation that you have with kids before they take a test. It's not test prep, and it's not an assessment.
But we do that already. I mean, the 3rd grade teachers I spoke to spend at least a week doing that kind of thing. And they've had the DRA since kindergarten. So there's not this huge role for this assessment.
Great. Well, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I appreciate it.
Just a quick follow-up
Yeah.
question. Maybe this might be a question for you. The Reed report, how accessible is that at this point to, I actually had a parent ask me, what's up with that Reed report? How come we can't find it anymore?
I'd be glad to put it on the agenda in the future, give you an update.
Okay. On how to find it, how parents can find it?
Yeah, no, it's very accessible, yeah.
Good, okay. That's
Is it
great.
still on the web, Mark?
As far as I know, it is.
Okay. Great. Well, are there any other comments from the public? So we will look ahead to the next item on the agenda, which has to do with the consent agenda. So on the consent agenda tonight, we have the minutes of March 11th, and we also have the board's ratification of the collective bargaining agreement between the board and the Essex Educators Association. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries 4-0. I just want to, I don't think I said at the beginning of the meeting, Kim Gleason, our vice chair, couldn't be here at the beginning of the meeting, but she hopes to join us later on in the meeting, so she should be here a little bit later, hopefully. So at this point in the meeting, we'll turn it over to Mark, who is going to be giving us an update on subgroup performance under ENDS Policy 1.1.
So there's a PowerPoint presentation for you that you got I don't think you received this in the board package last week. You just received the executive summary. And with me tonight are my colleagues, Jessica Little, Director of Student Support Services, and Ellen Thompson, Director of Instruction and Technology Information Services. And as is always the plan, they will help provide some overview of this very brief report.
Okay.
If you recall, just to push the rewind button, given our continual efforts and challenges in closing the gap in performance between kids who are typically developing and those kids who have disabilities and kids who have the status of being low in their socioeconomic situation, it's important that we monitor those kids more frequently. So this year, as you know, I made a commitment to bringing forward data in the fall, in the winter, and the spring of this year, given the data that we have available, and I'll talk about that in a minute, to basically give the board a very quick snapshot on where our kids are semester to semester. So this is in keeping with the format that we used last fall. as evidenced by the comments from one of my teacher colleagues, this is the work ahead, that we have a lot of work to do in closing this gap in performance. We have lots of different ideas, lots of different perspectives on how to get there. One of those being what are the best ways to teach and what are the best ways to assess. And that's the work of our professional learning community, that there is not one right answer. That what we welcome is the input from all of our teachers in determining which way to go. So I appreciate my colleagues' comments tonight, but recognize, as the board should, that this isn't simple work. We are in the process of a change initiative in Essex Town. As I've talked to the board before, we're the first time really getting our nose to the grindstone around developing common assessments that are assessing the same things in the same way and having commitments as a team on how to address those learning needs in the future. These data are not robust data. These data can be perceived by some as being fairly subjective because they come from a report card. And as you know, as parents, current and former, children in school, report cards don't always tell the story. It really is very subjective based on the educator who's putting those scores down on the card itself. So we need to look at these data very, very cautiously because it really doesn't tell the type of story, the progress that kids are making. And just determining it using a report card score is not the way to do it. But it is the only data really that we have available to at this point. As reported last fall, the work of our professional learning communities has developed common assessments, and that work is still happening. We're not at the finish line yet, but until that time comes, these data are really the only available data that are there. You've also seen that these are grade level clusters, so we've combined grades, which makes it even more sort of non-scientific, because we didn't have a large enough N size or cohort to look at grade by grade because we start identifying children. So it's important for the board to know that this is just a dipstick to show us as a team here in the district professionals, what do our report card data tell us? And one of the takeaways for me has been that our report card system has to change. I know that's not brilliant, Ellen. A brilliant observation. I heard that snicker. The K-5 report card is more standards-based than the 6-8 report card. But the K-5 approach to scoring kids is different than the middle school. So you can't compare Founders Memorial School with Essex Middle School because the scoring system, that calibration is very, very different. So I think it's important, again, for me just to restate that here before in my opening remarks. So the work ahead, which Ellen and I will sort of team on towards the end of this brief presentation on what we continue to stick to. What's important is not to deviate from the path that we're on. But I think where schools get into trouble is they try something for a year and then they throw it out and they try something else because they haven't closed that gap. And we're in this for the long haul. That we've set our sights to the strategic plan on how to close that gap, and we need to stick to the strategies that we believe are an important way to do that. This conversation tonight about music, it is about music, but it's about instruction. And the decision to change that schedule is all about student learning without compromising the integrity of our vision or what the music program is about. So all the decisions that we make from here on out have to be about what's best for kids in terms of how to make sure all kids have access and are meeting that standard. So with all that said, I want to point out one error in my report, which
many people read.
One of you probably picked up, and I thought I was so careful about it. But this is not unlike kneecap scores in that unless there's a 5% or greater change in performance, it's really non-statistical. It doesn't have a lot of relevance in the conversation. So if you didn't see it, I'll point it out because I feel so bad about it. In the third paragraph, it states that a variance is less or greater than 5%. It should be the other way around, unless it's 5% or greater.
Right.
Okay, so my bad. That was an error on my part. None of you. Ellen's usually my spot checker. She didn't even pick it up. So.
Was she on vacation?
She was not. She's never on vacation. She's working hard. So the table really reflects the two areas that we show a slight decrease in performance. Again, Ellen's going to talk a little bit about why that's nothing to get terribly excited about because this is a very, very small group of children. I'll stop now and Ellen can go through the PowerPoint, which will again highlight some of these areas, and then we'll spend a few minutes talking about what we've been up to and the work that will continue.
Okay, great.
copy of that, Mark?
I have the presentation, this, Kathy, I don't have my executive summary.
Do you need that yourself, Bill?
No, it's all in my head.
He's my backup, Kathy, don't take it away from me.
I need new glasses. I can't.
Oh, and I was gonna steal your chair just while
Yeah,
you're
go
out.
for it.
I have other copies, somebody want one.
So,
You can send it after to, I'm good.
what we did was we went to the report card data, so we were looking for a data set that we could get at for the subgroups, okay? So I want you to know that we have other data, it's just that it shifts between trimester 1 and 2. So in the fall, when we came to you on October 22nd, we shared the local assessment data using the Gates McGinnity, part of what Kathy talked about before, and also the DRA data that was available at that particular time. We used those as a screening device to say if we were to look at this group, when that assessment was done in September, we can predict that there are going to be some troubles in this area or not. And so that's what you looked at. What ends up happening in the second trimester at, with the middle school and with Founders is that you don't do another screening at that particular time. They're doing an assessment for the kids who are identified off that Gates McGinnity screener. So there's a population of kids who get a different assessment along the way. So in other words, I don't have a full set for you of assessment. I have the kids who are tangled have some, and some of them show up in the SES group, and some of them show up in the IEP group, but not all. So that's the thing. We have data sets, they're just not full ones. So we went to the one that we had, which was the report card data set. So I'm just going to walk you through. It's the exact same. If you think about what we did in October before, it's the setup is the same. The first slide, we start out with EES. In your first slide now, I've superimposed the fall and the winter. So you can see trimester 1 and then the winter trimester, trimester 2. Our population for the school at EES is 397. It went up by 3. And then we're looking at the kids who are proficient or proficient with distinction. On the report card, that would be the 3s and 4s. And then you have your partially proficient, which are the 2s, and your substantially below are the 1s, okay? And so basically, these are your big numbers. And I think the way it presents in your handout, you should have that sitting over
Yeah.
the first slide, so it's a little bit easier to read.
So this is all kids in EES.
This is all
This is
kids in
not a
EES,
subgroup,
it's
this is
not a
preschool.
subgroup. And
It's
so
not
remember,
preschool.
pardon me?
Okay, yeah, it's K through 1.
It's K through 2.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
preschool.
It's not
On the
preschool.
report card, there's several toggles for reading. Is that the average of them all, or which toggle?
That is the average of the ones that
It's the
have data
average.
in them.
And
Yep.
so it's not what necessarily came off VCAP, because the teachers can change that toggle, correct?
What I'd ask for, Kathy, is just,
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
this board
Yeah.
meeting,
Just
I
trying
just
to
have to let the
understand.
board engage. Let's ask those questions
Yeah.
afterwards if we could.
Okay. I'll show you the first slide. I gotta get back on in my head where I was. Basically, this is the larger group, and our two identified groups are SES, which is identified through free and reduced lunch, and then also IEP. So those are the two groups we've been following. So what you're gonna see here in report card data, now remember, our report cards, it's a standards-based reading report card. So we've taken the standards, and that's what the teachers are referring to when they're talking about it. They're looking at the kids to that point in time and saying, are they where the standard would have them mid-year? Are they where standard would have them at the beginning of the year? And so these are your two subgroups. The left-hand column is SES, so you have fall sitting next to winter, okay? And so the idea is visually, what you really want to happen is the blue part of that bar, you want to be getting bigger, okay? And so in this particular case, you see from fall to winter that you have a growth piece that's happening. You won't go from 42% proficient or above to 52% proficient or above. So that's one of your pluses. Again, the local data you saw in the fall, because we did it off of screening data and off of the DRA, you didn't have the full 3 grades in it. That was another difference between you. This kindergarten doesn't do that same assessment at the beginning. So your fall data in October was the grades 1 and 2. This is K1 and 2. All right, and again, you're trying to get the subgroup big enough to put it on a chart. That's why last time when I talked to you about the kneecap, you had all those spots where you don't have 10. And so you need that number to get bigger in order to have it mean anything. Your IEP numbers, as you can see from the bottom, are much smaller than your SES numbers. Go for it.
So we want to see the blue get bigger.
Mm-hmm,
I assume we want to see the yellow get smaller.
exactly.
What about the red?
Well, the red is getting closer to, but it's not, I mean, you want them all
want-
going up into the blue.
Yeah.
But what you'll also notice is that there's stories that are held within bands. So I think I do actually have a pointer here. So there's a story right there.
Mhm.
Okay, so your orange band is getting bigger, which means there was growth from the 1s to the 2s, but not all the way up into the 3s.
Right.
So that's what happens when you put numbers in a table, you miss some of that, which is one of the reasons why we did both. We pulled out the table, gave you the kind of end result, but this one actually says that there actually was movement within the numbers.
Right.
You might remember a table I did for you a long time ago that had 5 points up, 5 points down, and I went through all the kneecap. I think everybody went cross-eyed over
I
it.
think so.
And I don't think Jim ever let me put it on the screen, but it's actually the more interesting story. Because in these little groups, kids are moving inside the bands, and that's what you don't see sometimes, because we go to the end score. So I think it's just important for you to know that.
This, I think, this is much easier, quick
Yeah, it's easy to,
view,
yeah,
but you're right,
yeah.
you lose a little.
yeah. So the next piece you'll see again is the math results, and overall, and again, this, I believe, shows up next to the bar graph, so you can see the two side by side. But you've got the 3s, the blue band in this case, and you can use that with your eyes. For the larger group in the fall was 69%, and it would have been 71% in the winter. So basically, they're the same. They haven't changed. Okay, so we didn't get that 5 percentage point difference. And again, the partially proficient staying about the same as well. And this is for the large group that's up on the screen right now. So things are fairly trucking along. They're not going down, but they're not going significantly up at this particular point. And then here's the bars. So again, SES is on your left, fall and winter, and then IEP, fall and winter, is on the right. The other piece I brought, and I don't know if it's of importance, but I just brought a copy of one of the report cards. This happens to be a grade 4, but you're all parents, so most of you have seen this before, so I didn't make copies, a whole bunch of them, but it's basically I was going to say the Common Core. It's not the Common Core. It's the Vermont Framework of Standards where the GEs sit, but it's those standards that they're marking against. The sea change that's going to happen is within another year, the reporting system does need to change because our standards have changed. So there's a lot of work that has to happen in between there. So again, in this particular one, you see things staying pretty much the same. You've got a little bit of action that's happening again right here in the IEPs between the 1s and the 2s. And do remember, look at how little that group is. It's 50 students we're talking about in 3 different grades. So when we talk about the fact that this data has limited qualities to it, it's 1 or 2 students can change some of those numbers in some ways. We hop over to FMS. And again, your N size has stayed pretty consistent. You have 1 new student that's moved in since fall to winter. You're proficient with distinction or proficient, what would have been the blue bar if we did it that way, is 59% fall. It goes to 63. And again, you have a change that's happening. It almost looks like, you're almost looking to see where they're picking up that number from the bottom numbers. But again, here are your. And again, the part that I want to point out again is the IEP-ness. Could be 24 very, very different IEPs that are being worked on. Right now, what you see is, again, the story between the 1s and 2s. Not as much movement up above, but those are very different characteristics, perhaps, of the program. And again, within over here, you've got a little bit of change that's happened between the 43 and the 47. But at the bottom, it's staying fairly the same. Math results. Again, there's a consistency in the numbers between fall and winter. And then when you look at the bar graphs, here's where you get one of your, this is an interesting one. It's not actually the way you want it to go.
The red is okay, but not the blue.
No, you want the blue. You want the blue bigger. So what ended up happening was the orange got bigger, and that's actually a lower score. So you had how many points is that? I can't do them, 14-point difference in the wrong direction. Whereas the special ed piece, the IEP stayed very consistent. So there's a conversation in there. Is it the unit that they're working on? Is it tougher than? Are they into multiplicative reasoning and that threw everybody over the board? Do teachers know more now about math instruction and so they're looking for more things? Because we've done a lot of work in it. So there's stories that sit inside of that sit inside of the classrooms with those kids.
Now, is this data based on teacher interpretation or test results?
No, this is teacher. These are report card grades.
It's a really good question, David, which, again, you're gonna continue hearing more about as we move towards more performance-based assessment, less reliance on, to use a tired example, quizzes. That we were gonna show tonight, I don't think we're gonna have time.
I actually have
Actually
binders,
samples of
yeah.
student work without the student's name to show you the type of work you might be scored on.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to what we wanna calibrate on is making sure that we're scoring that piece of work, not the quiz score, but the actual student work, in a way that's consistent across teacher and across teams and across grade levels. And we've
So
got
what I
work to do
collected
there.
was writing samples in grades 2, 5, and 8, just to show a broad range from teachers, and then also grades 2, 5, and 8 in math. What's the typical math you would expect? And then within that, there is a range of response from the students. Because really, it's about this. And it's also about teachers and how they calibrate around it. And that's the work of our PLCs, and that's what's happening right now. But we're still in our infancy as far as that goes. We're still talking about sort of the bigger things. We've got to get down to the grain size. What does it actually mean in the hands of the kids?
If, for example, there are 7 fourth grade classes, do all 7 classes give the same math test, or does every teacher make up their
No.
own?
There is more commonality now than probably there was before, but for the most part, teachers are responsible. On team, you would probably find that consistency of scores and assignments, but not necessarily across team. But that's what the PLC is bringing in. So they're doing more formative assessments that are the same.
So there's a lot of areas where,
There's a lot of variance there.
Yeah. And the other part is to sit down and say, what is a 4? What's a 4 really look like? And having these pieces out in front and having the teachers have a chance to do that part.
I hadn't got to that question.
Yeah.
Well, homework comes into it too. Some scores and report card reflect how much homework you contribute, and
All of the
kids
above.
who are labeled as low SES don't typically have the support at home to do homework, and yet if that's part of your grade, it affects those data. There's a lot to it.
And there should be.
And right at this moment, your teachers are learning about the shifts they're going to make in math instruction, the shifts they're going to make in literacy instruction. So again, while we're looking at report card data, as Mark said, the report cards are going to need to reflect a new world order, so to speak, as far as the Common Core goes. When we hop over to EMS, any of you know that when you have students there or not, is that they use a grading system. So they're not using the same report card that the K through 5 does. So the standards are not in front of the parent when they see it. It's a quiz score or a number of some sort that comes out at that particular point. So again, there's weighting that it is what it is. Again, you've got your numbers, your N size for the school is 430, went down 3. So we picked up those 3 in another school. But again, your proficiencies and your above proficiencies are much higher. So 82, 81%, you notice that in the kneecap as well. So if you went back to your kneecap results, you'd see these numbers are kind of very similar. If we look at the next one, here's your SES and your IEP population. So now your IEP population is at 35 students, whereas at the other 2 schools it was about 50. And your N size for SES is a little lower. That's often a result of self-reporting. Middle school kids self-reporting that they need free and reduced lunch. You know, not always does everything get in to the right place, where it needs to be. It's a little easier to do because it's digital now. They don't have to carry the paper.
Right.
It used to be you carried the paper, so your numbers dropped dramatically. So you've got about 10 kids difference in this one. So again, you see the change right here. which is the wrong direction again, because I'm pointing out all the wrongs. The other SES stays pretty constant. Some of these kids overlap, so some of your SES are IEP and some of your IEP are SES, no group is one or the other. Okay, your IEPs are not all SES, and your SES are not all IEPs, so. I checked it, I went through it. Again, your math, so it's, you even have a higher proficiency. Again, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade combined. Here you get what you want to happen right there. And otherwise, everything else stays fairly the same. And I think there's no end to the show, so I think that's the end of the show.
So in the spirit of time management, at the bottom of this executive summary, which is, can you shoot that back up there, please?
Sure, Tim, yep.
Are the usual suspects in terms of just highlighting some things that we feel are important to maintain in our approach to working with these populations of kids. And, but rather than going through those again, I thought just open it up for board comments, reactions, questions. Ellen and I and others can take. Jessica's here, of course, to answer any questions you might have around special ed and other issues that you have, questions you have.
So I appreciate this update, and I appreciate the fact that we're zeroing in on these two groups that we've talked a lot about. I guess I'm a little bit, I'd be interested to know, given your preamble about the data, whether or not you're
Getting closer to data?
well, the fact that you're not that impressed with the data itself, is it actually informing, is it helpful at all? You know, I mean,
In some respects,
you've cast so much doubt on the data itself and the reliability of the data. Does it actually provide information that you can then act on?
I think yes,
Yeah.
because basically the report card data should stand up in a way that, and so we should have those report cards honed to what it actually is. If we had more of the performance-based assessments attached to the report card, you'd have an easier piece of it if there are
Right.
more common assessments.
Yeah, I think having to cluster grades is problematic because it doesn't really tell a story underneath those numbers. Because if those are clustered grades, but then you have to look at the grade itself, you have to look at the team itself, and then teachers like our special educators look at the kids, and that's that constant progress monitoring of individual students. So I think this data, they're valuable, but it's one set of data combined with others. By themselves, they don't stand up, but when you combine them with other information we have, they are useful. They are helpful.
Right. It doesn't paint such a dramatically different story compared to other data that you have,
No.
and that's why there's some.
And they basically talk to each other. I mean, it's painting very similar strokes as what you saw in October.
Right.
I went back to the October one and was trying to look through and just make sure, is this a different story? It's not. Would I like to be able to tell you more that's sitting under it? Yeah, and I think that's what our work is next. Right now, we're working on curricular frameworks that will have assessments within them. Those will be linked along the way. So, I mean, I think we'll be in a good place with the Common Core is going to force our hand on some of that.
Do we have any access to data on evaluation done by anybody outside of our little school community? I mean, other organizations within our community that do evaluations, private groups that do evaluations. Is there any sense of how many of our kids are being evaluated, treated, tutored outside
I
of
think that's you, Jessica.
our school districts?
For their total program?
Not necessarily for the
As-
not necessarily for the program, not necessarily for the program, their IEP or whatever that's part of our school district, but how many kids are utilizing outside services, tutoring services, other
Sylvan
evaluation
Learning Center,
services.
things like that?
Sylvan, Stern, those kinds of places.
Oh, in addition to what they're getting here?
Yeah.
Is
Is that monitored at all? Do we even know that?
I don't know unless it's part of the IEP process and the school district's paying the bill.
Are you trying to
Um,
get at whether or not those students perform better than students that don't have those services?
I'm not sure what I'm trying to get at. Just a sense of, I know there are these services out there. Anecdotally, I've heard from some more use. They're seeing more people, more kids.
Yeah, I think it's a
I
good,
don't know if that's
something that it would be a good thing to, I don't know how we get that data, but we've got people in this audience who as soon as you guys started talking, they left, by the way, don't personally. Right.
They said their piece. I know.
Who have 20 kids in private lessons for viola.
Right.
And they're going to public school. We have anecdotally, you know, that moms and dads access math tutors in the district
Right,
because
right.
some moms and dads don't feel that the math program is adequate. And we've heard that, I've heard that for the last 2.5 years that I've been here. So I think it's an interesting question, one which perhaps could be used as an indicator to determine whether or not the program we're offering to all students is meeting that need. But I do know, again, anecdotally, that moms and dads do access
Right.
above and beyond the public school experience.
Right. Yeah. I was wondering, would it be? I mean, I think there are probably a few big players out there. There's probably a couple of little private tutors also, but Sullivan, Stern Center.
Yeah, Jessica, do you have another?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, there are a lot
Cooney,
of, there are
right.
a lot of folks out there, but similar to the music analogy, and I was thinking that is why someone's accessing that service.
Right.
So I think that's the important piece, because if you think about music in that, as an example, are you doing it to sort of learn a specialty and sort of further hone your skills, you know, in a different way, and that's sort of above and beyond what we're offering. And so if you sort of equate that to reading, is it because the kid needs extra assistance in reading and they're below, you know, what we would consider proficient? Or is it because they're an amazing reader and they really want to learn about history, and so it's a specialized tutor in that sense? So I would wonder why they're accessing.
Yeah.
And then look at our programs and see why that might be.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. You probably couldn't go to Sylvan and say, "So tell us all the kids that are from Essex that are here." I
Right.
suspect that's probably
I
confidential.
bet parents would
But-
answer that
yeah,
question
see that-
though, if you did a survey. and
Yeah.
said,
Yeah, it's an
"Do you
interesting question.
access?"
Any other questions? Dave?
Have you done any kind of an analysis, and I think I know the answer, for students who are in music, chorus, band, and orchestra, where those students fit in on some of these charts?
They probably, I haven't done that, so I can't tell you for a fact, as far as what their grade point average is. You mean as far as whether they're in the nearly achieving or the above?
Just where they stand on that.
I'll probably tell you just from my gut, but,
I think I could too, but
Yeah.
I think it could be kind of interesting, but it could be very time consuming.
What we continue to be, you know, discouraged by, and I know that my teacher colleagues has personalized this a lot, that we're not making the type of progress that we'd like to be able to make, and it's just one of those unfortunate challenges we have as public school educators and leaders to be able to close that gap by the flip of the switch is just very, very difficult. You know, the level of disability, certainly, you know, we don't make any excuses, but we've got some, you know, as Ellen pointed out, I don't know how many eligibility categories we have today in special education, but it's got to be over 15, 20.
Disability
Yeah.
categories.
And those children just need a lot of individualized, specialized instruction. So these data tell a story about a big group of kids, but we do see progress with individual students. So even though they still might be in the lower band, they might have been even lower in the lower band when they started in the fall. So we're just challenged by this. Why can't we close it more quickly? And it drives us to want to do better, but it really presents a lot of hard challenges.
You know, and this probably is not germane, but I know that over the course of this fiscal year, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of kids receiving special education services. Is that
Down eligible.
is that a factor in these numbers at all? The fact that we have more?
Well,
I have my hand raised for a couple of reasons. One is that I had 5 new students on my caseload, either IEP or AST kids, and typically a lot of the low socioeconomic kids are AST kids. They all moved in after the start of the year. So I was looking at Founders data and I'm going, that probably accounts for some of that change, and so that's the problem sometimes with any data, but specifically I think it would be for progress reports. I mean, I had 3 kids come in October or November, and then progress reports. So I
So
think there's that.
migration does affect it, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I have to tell you, I have a fair amount of parents right now who can't read themselves. And a lot of them went to school the last time we had that high illiteracy bubble, when 65% of the kids weren't reading. Well, those 65% kids are now parents. So kids are not getting read to. We're having to get tutors and mentors and other people here to read to those kids, because they're not getting, I always tell my students this: you have to work harder than everyone else to catch up. You know you're already behind. By doing the same as everybody else, you're not gonna catch up. You're just gonna stay the same. So if you wanna catch up, you have to work harder. And I'll help you work harder. And I'll find people to help you work harder, but you can't just do the same. And I think that's the dilemma that we have. I have seen, this year I'm on my 9th evaluation for special education. Last year I did 3.
So kids, thanks Kathy, kids have to work harder and we have to work harder. And because you saw in one of the bullets is that, the learning opportunities that kids have outside of the classroom is code for some kids it's not an equal playing field. And so we can't just say parents have to work harder and kids do have to work harder, but we have to think differently about our work. And these data tell us a story, and our job is just to be as analytical as we can be without spending too much time saying we're monitoring, we're not closing the gap, so what do we need to do differently? And continue to challenge ourselves there. And we don't, again, this is not impressive data, but it's our reality in terms of where we are today.
Great. Any other questions or comments on this presentation? Thank you, Ellen.
You're welcome.
Thank you very
Yep.
much. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Mark.
It's always a pleasure.
Mark, I don't beat them with a stick. That's not what I meant.
I admire our standards have to be high for all kids. We cannot water our standards
And
down.
I don't expect them to do something I haven't taught them.
No, I know that. I know.
Okay.
So we're actually a little bit back on track now, which is great, despite the fact that we had a longer than expected public comment session.
Do you want to load up your presentation?
I do. I'd love to. Yeah, I emailed it to you. Can
Yep,
you
I got
call
it. I put it up.
Oh, great. So, despite the fact that we don't have members of the public to present to, I think I'd love to go through with this presentation because our ETN is here.
Well, I thought you were going to say because Kathy was here.
Well, Kathy
can't leave.
Well, that's true. That's true.
I used to come all the time till I got sweaty.
Glad to have
Before
you
Mark
back.
was here.
So, unless a board member strenuously objects, I would like to use this opportunity while our ETN is here to give this presentation so that folks watching the rebroadcast of this meeting can see some of the data that we're going to talk about tonight. This is also my test run of the presentation that I'm going to give on April 1st. So it's
April Fool's Day.
April Fool's Day. It's a perfect setup for me. So it's an opportunity for me to practice giving this presentation, and I would love board members' feedback on how to improve it.
Can we just heckle?
You can heckle, yes.
All right.
And so if folks want to scoot out, now is the perfect time. Roger, thank you for staying. 'Cause I know that I'm going to look at you at least once and go. And thank you both for staying. You can go. You can really go.
I live in Waterbury. I'm used to coming home. So
Oh, okay.
the janitors will tell you I'd still like to be here.
And we can get these slides to Ariane if that's helpful for you guys.
Yeah.
Great. So,
And the other critical eye in here, of course, is our friend Roger George, who's here tonight just to ring in when you feel.
absolutely. Please do, yeah. So I encourage anybody to jump in at any point during this presentation. So just to let you know kind of the way I approach this presentation is I've used some of the great data that Mark and Roger prepared as we developed the budget over time. And I use some of that, a lot of that data you'll see here. I haven't yet given a nice, pretty wrapper to all the slides, but I tried to do some of that at the beginning at least. So, so let's talk about the FY14 proposed budget. It's a little weird giving you this presentation. So as you know, as we began the conversation about the budget development process, which started, I think, at the end of November, maybe early December, the board, as it worked with the administration, provided a framework of sorts, kind of rules of the road as the draft budget was being developed. And the number one interest of the board in the development of the budget was the fact that the budget should be developed with an eye toward, are we providing the resources necessary in order for the district to meet the ends policy? So the outcomes that the board has established for kids drives every decision and drove a lot of our questions as we developed the final budget in terms of what was the right amount of resources to apply to bring to bear on the work that we do. So that drove most of our conversation, but we also have an eye toward the ability of the community to pay for the educational experience that we provide. And so that the economy continues to be a strain on members of our community. There is a little bit of light on the horizon that maybe we're coming out of the recession, but we know that there are many families that are still struggling with the impact of the recession, and so that still weighs on our mind, of course, as we think about the costs and the proposed budget for this coming year. And there were other things, of course. This full list is just some more detail about some of the other factors that came into play as the budget was being developed and other considerations we wanted to keep in mind. So next slide. The good news is that this investment has been well worth it. Over the years that, and at least during my time on the board and many other members of the board, the community has been very supportive of the budget, very supportive of the district, and that has led to significant outcomes for kids, for families, and for the community. And so I think that's important to keep in mind that that the investment that the community has made is appreciated and has actually borne fruit. And these are just some of the ways that that the outcomes, the investment in the Essex Town School District has been a good one. So one of the key factors in our conversation, of course, is enrollment. And we actually invited a demographer to come in and speak with us this year to talk about what might be on the horizon in terms of the enrollment picture for Essex Town. We were caught a little bit off guard at the beginning of last year at the influx, I think, of kindergarten students, at a higher than expected influx of new students. And luckily, the administration was nimble on its feet and recommended the hiring of a new kindergarten teacher to make sure that those student-teacher ratios stayed within our guidelines that we've established. And we talked a lot about those guidelines at the beginning of this process. So as we look at the numbers, we project pretty steady enrollment as we go into next year. The one, I guess, bright spot is one way to look at it, is the aggressive investment and growth that we've seen in the pre-K program. That's also, that's our program, but also we've been working very hard to strengthen partnerships with other private preschools in the area as well, all with an eye toward making sure that kids come to school as kindergartners ready to go, or better, ready to go in terms of their readiness to learn. So the investment in the pre-K program has been a significant one. It also happens to bring additional revenues into the district as well. Next slide. So as we look at the big bucket areas of expenditures for the proposed FY14 budget, I think it probably is not a shock that 53% of the total budget is dedicated to instruction, to learning, to classroom learning, and another 23% is dedicated to special education. So that's where the bulk of our focus should be and is, as reflected in the budget. 10% of our costs are related to administration, leadership in our school buildings, as well as the overall district, and then about 14% in operations and maintenance, which includes transportation as well. So this is, from a macro view, this is how the budget breaks down. And it's not, and percentage-wise, it's not much different from what we see year to year. As we turn our attention to the FY14 budget, there were three cost drivers that led to what we'll talk about is an overall increase in the budget for FY14. And those three cost drivers were salary increases and FICA increases as a result of negotiated contract agreements with both our teacher staff and support staff. Special education purchase services was a significant increase as well, and we can talk a little bit about the detail behind those numbers. And health insurance, of course, is the big dynamic issue of the day. Our state, as most of you know, is moving toward a single payer system. This increase that we're looking at for FY14 has more to do with the increase that we've been told to expect from VHI, which is the organization that administers our health benefits and the health benefits of most school districts across the state. So when you look at those three items alone, those three items account for 83% of the overall increase that we're showing for FY14 in terms of the budget. So not a lot of wiggle room in terms of ways that we can scrimp and save. These are fixed costs that we have to incur and deal with on an annual basis. This year, though, some of the increases were more significant than in years past. So the proposed budget is for FY14 is over $940,000 more than the FY13 base operational budget. We thought it was important to pull out some key factors that were hopefully one-time occurrences in the FY13 budget. We had an FMS roof replacement, and we also transferred a significant amount of money to begin a capital maintenance and reserve fund, which was approved by voters last year. So those were two significant events that occurred last year within the budget. But when you look at operations to operations, we are seeing a 4.9% increase in the budget overall. Now the good news is, and the news that we're very proud of, is that over the previous 3 years, the administration and the school board were able to keep the average increase to the budget at a 0.2%. And if you recall, things like challenges for change and other initiatives that were taken to really take a hard look at our expenses and to rein some of those expenses in, that was good work. But unfortunately, not as many districts took advantage of that opportunity as Essex Town did in terms of reducing some of the expenses during that period of time. But when you look at the reality of some of those three cost drivers, there was no way for us to really significantly avoid a 4.9% increase in the budget, given the fact that we had made so many great efforts at reducing and streamlining costs in the previous 3 years. Roger, Mark, I would encourage you to jump in if you have any sort of color commentary that you'd like to provide. So when we look at general fund revenues, it's a mixed picture, but generally a good one, in that we are able to use some of the savings from the Founders Memorial School roof replacement to help offset some of the FY14 increase to local taxes. We did experience a less of a fund balance this year, moving from FY13 to 14, as a result of the impact of the audit that was conducted for special education costs and the reimbursement around special education costs. Some of the payback that the district made to the state, we used those fund balances to help offset those costs in this coming year. And I'm glad and the board was glad to find out that some of those, even though an audit is something that happens once in a blue moon, that the district was able to take a hard look at some of the procedures involved with tracking time and making sure those reimbursements are as on track as possible. But it was interesting to learn about how difficult that can be to track those costs.
Yeah, just to push the pause button on your presentation,
Absolutely.
It's just an FYI for the 4 board members present. I did speak to a person at the Agency of Education today. We have a meeting next Thursday at 2 o'clock. I'll be going to Montpelier with Roger and Jessica to once again frame for the agency our concern and our position that the results of their audit, we want to challenge several remaining items, and we hope we've made the budgetary adjustments we've needed to based on the money, the bottom line that we were given last month or 2 months ago. I did write a letter to the commissioner then Commissioner, now Secretary, and it's been about a month and a half, and I finally got the call on Friday, so we're going to go down and have a face-to-face and see if we can't get them to move their stake a little bit.
Great.
So, yeah,
Great, that's good news, thanks.
we hope it's good news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. We also anticipate increase in reimbursement for special education costs and IDA grants as well. So that's the general fund revenue picture. In terms of the state education fund, Essex Town's need for additional revenue in FY14 from the state education fund is actually increasing at a lower rate than what was projected or anticipated from other districts across the state. I don't know if you recall, but at the beginning of the year, as the governor and the legislature were getting down to their work in Montpelier, they were anticipating that they would see about a 5.5% increase or a 5.5% increase in the need for state education funds from districts across the state. We're happy to be able to show that the proposed budget for FY14 is actually showing just a 3.7% increase in our need for state education funds. So, it gives me an opportunity to sort of just harken back to the fact that in FY11 and 12, we did work really hard to reduce our draw from the state education fund to the tune of $750,000. And I think it's always a good thing to keep in mind that about 60% of our state education fund revenue is collected locally, and 40% comes from taxpayers from around the state. So, next slide. So if we look at the impact of the FY14 proposed budget, we see that per pupil spending for Essex Town remains below the statewide average, as well as well below the Vermont penalty threshold. So our per pupil spending is $398 less than the projected statewide average. And so this is a figure that we typically spend a lot of time thinking about as a board, and it's one of those things that we encourage the administration and ourselves to abide by as we develop a budget, is to try to remain below that threshold, because exceeding the threshold has undesirable consequences. So the next slide talks a little bit about the fact that on this year's ballot, on April 9th, when voters go into the voting booth at Essex Middle School, anywhere from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., they will have an additional question on their ballot, which is asking the community to continue to invest in the newly created Capital Improvement and Facilities Reserve Fund. And this is a fund that was established last year to help us begin to strategically address some significant capital upgrades and repairs that need to happen across the district in many of our facilities and on our grounds. So that does have an impact on the total question in terms of the overall budget increase. And when you look at the question of the $75,000 in additional funds that we're asking for the reserve fund, it has an impact of $4.05 for every $100,000 of assessed value. So it is a part of the pie, a part of the puzzle this year, but we think that it's an important fund that will help us continue to be able to address some of the concerns which are represented on the next slide. The next slide shows just a brief, a short list actually, of some of the repairs that are necessary across the district, and it gives you a sense of the scope of the challenge that we face in maintaining and keeping our facilities up to snuff, with, of course, the number one concern being to make sure that we have safe and healthy environments for our students, faculty, and staff. Next slide. So how does it all shake out? This is the impact. This slide shows the impact on taxes for Essex Town residents. And so based on this proposed budget, Essex Town taxes are projected to increase about 4.4%, which translates into about a $60 increase per $100,000 of assessed value for residents of Essex Town. And if you take into account, I'm sorry, where am I here? I'm
Bullet
lost.
3.
Right, so the remaining 15, the district's increased need for revenue from the state education fund is about 85% of our tax increase. The remaining 15% is attributed to the state's change to the base homestead tax rate, which is an important factor that we use to calculate all these numbers. Went from 89 cents to 94 cents per $100 of assessed value. So that had a significant impact as well. Increased enrollment helps. So the fact that we're looking at increased enrollment at the pre-K and also at the high school helps to reduce or keeps the tax increase lower. And about $37 of the projected increase is related to the Essex Town budget, while $23 is for the high school, which is that blended tax rate. So when you combine them both together, that's what you end up with there at the $60 per $100,000 of assessed value. I think it's important to remember, though, that over the course of the last 2 years, the blended tax rate between the town and the high school was actually a decrease of 3%. So we've had some good years of being able to sort of restrain and keep costs within a respectable limit. And this year we've seen an increase. After a number of years of decreases, we're seeing a little bit of an increase. So that's the tax picture overall. So the last slide just gives you a picture of where we've been, and I think this is really a helpful slide to understand the work that we've done previously and the challenges that we're facing today. I think in my opinion, it shows a very responsible approach to keeping costs in line while making sure that the district has the resources it needs to carry out its mission. And even though there's maybe a higher increase on the budget and taxes than we've seen in previous years, the board believes that this is the investment that we need this year to make sure that the children of Essex Town have the opportunity to be successful, and that Essex Town community continues to be a desirable place for people to live and to bring their students and to contribute to this community overall. So I would encourage folks to take a look at the flyer. Residents were mailed a quick overview flyer in the last couple of weeks. Every resident in Essex Town received a copy of this, and just this week or maybe last week, the full annual report was made available on the district website, which has additional detail about the budget, but also information about student performance and district initiatives as well.
It is on the website.
It is currently on the website.
That wasn't mailed. I don't know if you said that.
No, yeah, this wasn't mailed. It's being made available at certain
This one.
spots around town, but the full booklet is available as a PDF on the district website.
The budget flyer should have begun going out at the end of last week.
Yep. Right, so
I-
this is the.
I did notice a couple little tweaks. I don't even know if they're worth talking about it, but a few oddities in the flyer. One I think was just purely a typo in the administrative services district leadership. If you go online and look at the budget, for some reason on here the change was 60,733, and online it's 10,733, resulting in the. It was just a.
What do you mean online?
There's a place. I'm trying to remember where I saw this on the district website.
Yeah.
A similar, not this exactly.
Okay.
But it was. I'm trying to remember. I was looking at it, comparing them,
Okay.
and there were just a few little things.
Well, thanks. I'll.
Well,
That
can
one-
you provide the link? I mean, maybe not now, but.
Yeah,
Because on the website, this is what lives up there now. But
Yeah, so we wanna make sure that this is what's out there.
Yeah.
So,
and well, I was just noticing it actually it might have been this that I was looking at actually.
okay,
If we went back about 15 pages, you do have there is the line for district leadership,
yep.
and I do remember that one.
all right. Well, we'll check it out.
Difference would
Right there,
probably be
right there.
attributable to that math consultant moving in a more final in the final development of the budget, rather than a salaried position, it became a purchase service
Because
under
Ah, okay.
curriculum and instruction.
Okay, so not a typo, it actually changed categories. Cool. Yeah, it's
well,
right
let's see
there.
where that
It's- it's
discrepancy is.
Under district services, 2/3 of the way down, administrative district services, you got the 1137, which is here, then you got 1148.
Yep.
On here, it's 1198. So
And
that's
and there's an offsetting decrease
someplace
on-
else.
in the
That I
structure,
missed. I
yes.
didn't catch the other.
Okay.
Well, again, it's that congruence of numbers is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
So
If
we'll
that
make
needed to
sure
render
that
for
the
the,
April, for the April 1st presentation, we'll make sure that we just have the latest and greatest.
Yep.
Cool.
Any other questions from our guests?
I totally understand. Went to my school budget.
I'd like to add just a couple of
Yeah,
things
please
to
do.
think about as prepare for next Monday,
Yeah.
Brendan. One is good presentation. I think you grabbed the best, the most salient slides. We have, Roger, I think, something to have in your back pocket. There might be a question from someone in the audience on what contributed to the health increases. We have a one-pager that talks about the investments VHI made, which contributed to it going up. High usage of acute care went up, but
Right.
we might want to provide you with that in the event the question does come up. If you
Yeah, I mean, I think that where I'm expecting more questions on April 1st or from other folks as they see this is that having that backup data around those three cost drivers,
yeah.
I think is helpful. And you did have some very useful information about the increase in special education costs and what led to some of those
Yeah.
increases. I pulled it from the presentation.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Wondering how much detail, do we want to be able to provide? How much detail will people want other than to know that it's increased?
Yeah.
So what I was thinking as I think to the next time I'll have to give this presentation, or anybody else is welcome to give it in my place, is to have maybe just a short list of sort of what led to each of those, the
Yeah,
significant
I agree.
increases.
I was going to just to add, and I guess it's an unusual venue tonight to present, but we talked a lot about the importance of all children will learn,
Yeah.
and that kids with exceptionalities are no exception. And that said, we undershot in FY13 the cost of services for kids with disabilities, and so we made that up this year. That was unbudgeted.
Right.
But really to tell a story about how important it is that we provide these kids what they're entitled to through an individual education program, but how important that is.
Right.
And that the growth we see in their progress, as measured by report cards or kneecaps, suggests that we're investing in their future as well. So I think that that's a really powerful story to continue telling people before we jump into the numbers. You didn't need to do that tonight because
Yeah.
we're all friends, but I think it's
Right.
important that, for me anyway, that we have a chance to really put that out there, that their needs are second to none.
Would it also be important to add something, doesn't a certain percentage of the money for special education come back? So 50% of the dollar comes back?
Even more than that, Kathleen, we have those slides.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, and the reimbursement story around special ed, I think, is an important one for people to understand, and so I think that's the kind of detail that I wanted to sort of have at the ready, but not, I don't know if that slide, grabbed it or not, but I think that's important to be able to say, this is a significant cost, but there's also a significant reimbursement scenario, where I think it's 1/3 of the costs are local, is that right?
It's about the net,
Yeah,
about the
whereas 2/3
local
of the
net,
costs
yes.
are reimbursed or covered by state and federal.
The other thing to mention, and maybe we don't want to mention it on the first, but Roger and I are going to present next time we have the opportunity through a monitoring report 2.4 to be specific, is that our carry forward is not looking great in developing FY15. We'll have some information for you on that, and there's lots of reasons for that. But as we think about the future, we're not out of the woods.
Right.
We know that we're going to continue to be challenged by future budgets as well. And I think just a little bit of foreshadowing might not be inappropriate.
Right.
We want your vote, but we'll continue working hard during tough times.
Yeah.
A little bit of math that you saw me playing with while you were talking. It wasn't distracting. But I did just take our 2010 budget and multiplied it by 5. Came up with 96,345,000. If we had just level funded from 2010 to now, including the FY14, if you actually add together what we did, we're at 96,345. We're almost exact 96 million.
Yeah, yeah.
We are $10,000 off.
Right.
If we had just done absolutely level funding for 5 years.
Right.
I think that's pretty impressive to think we could have level funded for 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, people see a 4.9% right now, and that feels big, but
Yeah.
we didn't just level and go 4.9, we actually
Yes.
did that big dip.
Yeah, maybe showing that curve would be a good thing to do.
Yeah.
That visual might be helpful.
Yeah, because over 5 years, that
Right.
is what we've done, but actually we've done that.
Right, right.
So it's,
That's a good point. Yeah.
but I think it's ironic that we came out to that, when I added up the number, there, really?
It's almost like we
96,345 versus 96,355. Unbelievable.
Great. Any other thoughts or comments?
When you indicated that benefits are going up, that is because of the increased cost on healthcare.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Roger, any thoughts or input from you on how we might present differently or better?
I think you touched upon the main points.
What's that? You want one? Okay, well, we'll move on then to our next agenda item. Thank you, everyone.
Good job, Brendan, thanks.
So our next agenda item is actually a monitoring report about me. And I want to thank Ben for thinking ahead.
It's only appropriate, right?
Yeah, so the first mark against me is the fact that I forgot to assign this monitoring report. So luckily Ben came to the rescue, and so he now will present us with a monitoring report, 4.4 on the chair's role. So I will turn it over.
I'm gonna do it over here, so I don't
To you.
my computer.
Okay.
You guys mind, is that okay?
That's
Does that
fine.
screw you up, RATN? Alright, good. Oh boy, cable not connected.
We can see it on the screen.
There you go, you got it.
So you want to tee this up, Ben?
Yeah, so 4.4 chair's roll, you can see up there. The chair, especially empowered member of the Essex Town School Board, ensures the integrity of the board's process and secondarily, occasionally represents the board to outside parties accordingly. You'll see going down, I won't read each of the bullets, that as in years past, I rated our chair to be in compliance under this policy. I think I echo for the board when I say that Brendan's done a very capable job of representing the board both at meetings and also outside our regular meetings at various functions. And as noted in the evidence that can be found in our meeting agendas, I'll reiterate what, as Brendan said earlier, given the agenda curveball, if you will, for this evening, we're on schedule to finish as noted, so that's nice. Board meeting minutes, self-assessment forms, announcements that are penned by the chair, of which there have been many that Brendan has generously taken on. Legislative dessert meeting, I added representation at the board annual conference on there as evidence, which was done during this past year. And then, of course, statements from our superintendent, Mark, concerning, proper and productive interaction outside of our normal board engagements.
Any questions or feedback for Ben on his report? Mark, any thoughts?
I agree 100%.
He concurs 100%.
Oh, okay. I thought that was a motion.
No.
So if I abstain, we still have a quorum, right?
We do.
So, well, if there's no other questions or feedback, comments, I'll call for a motion then.
Motion to approve the report as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And one abstention. So 3 ayes and 1 abstention. Motion carries.
You can't vote
Um,
for yourself?
Oops. Oh, as Kim.
Kim is absent, I'm abstaining.
Kim's absent,
Yeah.
Brendan's abstaining.
Yeah, it just feels weird.
You
Voting.
did.
I just want to say that while I appreciate the the show of compliance on the monitoring report, I do want to sort of just say that this is a team effort, and you know, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to serve as your chair, but it's the work of everyone on this board that makes our work so worthwhile and successful. So thank you all for the work that you do, and for all the help that you give, and for the times especially when you bail the chair out. Much appreciated.
Quite welcome.
So
It is
so
a
thank
team
you.
effort.
It is a team effort. Great. So at this point of the meeting, we are actually at a point where we are ready to go into an executive session. Before we do that, however, I would just like to skip to the last item on the agenda, because sometimes this gets lost not the adjournment, not the adjournment. I just want to say, wise guy, the budget information meeting is on April 1st, and it's at the Essex Middle School at 7 p.m. That is the meeting, the last opportunity for members of the public to see a presentation and engage in questions and provide feedback on the proposed budget. I would encourage folks to vote on April 9th at the Essex Middle School on the budget. And you can also stay in touch with the board via our Facebook page and also the district website. For our next regular meeting, do we happen to have access to the calendar to see what
Yep.
monitoring reports are coming up?
Sure do.
Just want to make sure we assign
I
those.
don't think that we do until May, which would be because our meeting after the 1st will be the annual meeting on the 9th, Tuesday
Yeah.
the 9th, and that's obviously the follow-up to the voting for budget and members. And then on the 13th, according to our calendar, we have 4.2 and 4.5 for governance process. And it looks like 2.1 and 2.2 for executive limitations. Does that sound right, Mark?
That's May 13th?
That's May 13th, yeah.
So that's our next regular
That's
meeting?
our next regular meeting
So-
taking place here.
So 4.2 is board job description, and what was the other one?
4.5?
4.5 is board code, members' code of conduct, right? Those are the ones we typically do as part of our reorganization. Okay. Any takers on those?
I think that's what we'll have a new board member.
We may have a new board member. Maybe we should assign work now.
I was planning on,
Salon night and a few other things.
she got a big box on her front porch the other night.
I came back from salon night with a huge box, find a huge box on my front porch.
Very good. Well, I will take 4.5. Is that right?
Can I ask a question before I leave?
Of course.
I was assuming that I could come tonight because I was responding to the minutes and information that was done at a board meeting. Is that correct? That I could do that? Since I had spoken to Mark about it beforehand, not about coming here, but the same question and stuff?
Well, you know, folks are welcome to come to meetings, and what we typically do, and we're somewhat loose about the protocol around it, but we typically provide that public comment period at the beginning. And we sometimes allow for folks on the floor to comment as well. But sometimes, due to time constraints, we might have to ask people not to comment from the floor as the board is considering a particular
I just want to make
question.
sure that, because, your whole new governance thing is different than
Mhm.
the way you used to. Was that
Yes.
the line, Mark? Are you going to talk to me tomorrow?
I'll follow you out to your car. I won't wait till tomorrow.
Thank you very much for coming in. Thanks for
Your perspective.
your perspective.
It's
She
great,
brings
yeah, it's
up
great
an
for us to
interesting
get
point, though,
perspective
What's
from
that?
all
She
different.
brings up an interesting
So,
point that
I-
the minutes were
Thank you
on
for
the agenda, so she perhaps chose not to address it during comments, being on the agenda, but we don't generally discuss the items on the consent agenda, so the opportunity is lost.
Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah, approval of minutes. I mean, you came because you read the minutes from the previous
Right.
meeting.
And it wasn't to deface or defame anything, I just really
And it wasn't
feel
to edit
don't
the
have
minutes.
extra time to
You
do
know what I
something
mean?
that's.
It wasn't a question about whether the minutes were correct or not
Right,
correct.
right.
So I think we're good. Thank you for coming.
So I was okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You're fine. Yes,
We
thank
would love
you.
to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you again.
You heading out?
I would assume so.
Yes.
You want me to stay?
No, thank you for coming.
That,
So, yeah, so what is the next thing we need to do? Because I think Thursday and then Friday.
Yeah. We,
Is anybody else going on Thursday?
right, so,
I think
Kim.
Kim's gonna try to, right?
Kim was gonna try to, and I now have a conflict for Thursday, so Kim and I talked, she actually stopped by my house yesterday, so.
Okay.
We're gonna
Yeah,
talk
right.
about the board engagement plan for the rest of this week. And also, whether or not somebody can go with you to that orientation session, I think as well. So, either Kim or I will get back to you on
Okay.
on the plan. And Kim and I will also be in touch with some of you to see if you're available to help with some of the outreach over the next week or two.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
All right, see you
Thanks,
soon.
Rachel.
So I'll take 4.5 for the May meeting, and I'll ask Kim if she can do 4.2. So let the minutes show, please. But that's the plan.
May 13th, wow. Okay, month off for me.
Yeah, it's, well, we've got,
Well, we have April
Break in there,
vacation
don't we?
as well, so that kind of throws things.
What I'm gonna have for you on Monday night, not as a discussion item, but it's gonna be sort of a pared-down version of the rubric that you used during the direct inspection, the Learning Expo, which was only at the end of the middle school. But if you're comfortable in your role as parent, and David, I wanna talk to you about how we set up an opportunity for you to experience the celebration of learning on Tuesday. But as a parent, to enjoy what your child has to share and what the teacher of your child has to share, but also as a board member, what are you seeing, what are you
Right.
experiencing? I'm gonna, because it's a different way of approaching, I'm gonna have a sort of a pared down, easier to administer rubric. So I'm on the calendar for a monitoring report for 1.2 and 1.1 and 1.3, but again, it's more direct inspection rather than a report specifically.
Right.
is
So
that
celebrate-
that's on the first, meeting
I'll
of the
have that
first?
for you next Monday night,
Okay.
Right.
that you may, I'll ask you to try to use
Right.
during your journey on the 9th.
Now, are you expecting, so some of us will be at the celebration of learning for our particular students.
Yeah.
Do you want us to be?
So you can score your child's work.
I'll
No
definitely be
one will-
scoring
yeah.
that. But no, I'm just wondering, do
Yeah.
you expect the board, or do you hope the board can attend a certain part of the
Yeah,
day
so
together?
I've asked principals, I wanna give you, a ticket to ride to go to different,
Okay,
for teachers who will be comfortable with that, to
I
go
see.
see other student work.
Okay.
And what they're doing around technology in particular. Because you might, if I don't orchestrate that, you might not have the opportunity, 'cause it's gonna be a very busy day.
okay,
So look, I'll speak more about that on Monday.
Okay,
And
great.
David, I'll work with you individually, given you'll have a different access point.
great, thank you,
I'll give you a guided tour.
Thank you.
Wow.
great. So,
Speak right up, because I'm hard of hearing too.
so at this point, I'll need a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of evaluating the superintendent.
Sounds ominous.
I'm
outta here.
I move that we, move to executive session.
Is there a second?
Evaluate
I'll
that.
second that.
All right, all's in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, we're in executive session.
Do you want to take that to Kim since you're
Yes.
neighbors now?
Yes, thank you, yes.